The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
You are back in the House of Mystery, and it's a mysterious world that we live in.
It certainly is.
Well, yeah, every day I wake up and it's just even more exciting than the day before.
Yes, it is.
It is. Well, speaking of excitement, let's just get into this because we've got this Canadian writer, and she's got another Marketville mystery, and it's Before There Were Skeletons. So, Judy, Penz, Sheluk, thank you for being here.
Well, hi, Alan. Nice to be here, and hi, Dave.
You know, Marketville, that must be I was thinking about this. This is, you've got a lot going on in that town.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty wicked. It's like when you watch those shows on TV, those series, and it's just it's just a small town of 80 people, but they have a murder every day.
Yeah, like Cabot Cove, yeah.
I always wonder about that. Well, so how did this book come to you? Number 4.
Yeah, so there's 3 books in the series. The first one is Skeletons in the Attic, and then Past and Present, and then A Fool's Journey. And so Skeletons in the Attic was the story of Callie, the main protagonist, looking into her mother's disappearance 30 years before. And although that's more or less resolved at the end of the book, there are still some loose ends. And they're not tied up in books 2 and 3. And I sort of felt like it was time to, really tie up all those little loose ends, right? So my initial thought was to write a book called Before There Were Skeletons, which is what the title of the book is. But the thought was to actually place the book in 1978, the year that Callie was conceived, and tell it from her mother's point of view. And I thought, well, that'll be good. It'll be like a prequel, right? Before There Were Skeletons in the Attic. So I wrote probably, I'm going to say 75 pages, like a significant chunk of pages and words in Abigail, Callie's mother's voice. And it just was awful. Like, I don't know how else to describe it, but, I'd go to it every day and I'd read what I'd written the day before. That's my sort of normal practice. Try to write a chapter a day, go back, read the chapter the next day, and then soldier on. And I just, every day I'd dread a little bit more going back to it, thinking, this is just not very good. And it's not very interesting. And I just couldn't get Abigail's voice right. But what I did find is that by doing those 75 pages, I felt that I'd gotten to know her a lot better than I had previously, right? Because I got to know her as a young, she was 17 when she got pregnant with Callie, and she had to drop out of grade 13, which we had here in Ontario, not anywhere else, I don't believe. So anyway, I sort of felt like, okay, now I know her better, but I'm going to set the book in present day and somehow figure out a way to bring that past into Callie's present, right? So that was sort of how I ended up going to a present day with a nod to the past.
When you write missing person as a subject, there's got to be an evil character or some sense of evil throughout the town then, or somebody bad. Do you have issues writing an evil character?
No, not really, because I can be quite evil. No. I just look in my inner self and say, how would I do this? No. Actually, so Callie, her business is based in Marketville, but this particular book, there are 3 missing women. She's actually hired to investigate a woman who went missing in Miakota Falls, which is about 40 minutes north of where she lives in Marketville, an even smaller town than Marketville. And this woman went missing in 1995, and her daughter, and left behind a 1-year-old daughter. And it's her daughter that's come to Callie and said, listen, I know that you do this kind of thing. I want to find out why my mother left and if she's still alive or where she is, because nobody knows, right? And Callie is really intrigued by that case because Callie's mother disappeared on Valentine's Day, 1980, and this woman disappeared on Valentine's Day, 1995. So she was left behind by her mother. This girl was left behind by her mother. She feels sort of a connection right away. But as she starts looking into it, she finds that two other young women, roughly the same age, build, appearance, disappeared 2 weeks apart each in 1995. So 3 missing women, 1995, over a 6-week period in a small town. And so she starts, she figures, well, something definitely has to be up here, right? So she starts digging and through the old, clues, tries to get information from the police, doesn't get too far there. And it just sort of starts digging like through the past. And that's, so that's how it now. And then where I bring Callie's mother's past in is at the same time that she's doing that, her Callie, her grandmother, Abigail's mom, has approached Callie and said, look, I've got my daughter's yearbooks from, when she was in high school right through, and I'd like you to have them. And so Callie and her grandmother do not have a good relationship because her grandmother basically abandoned, her daughter and Callie's dad when they were, having a child. So she's not too fond of them really. But anyway, she reluctantly takes the yearbooks and starts digging through them, looking at things. And that's where she sort of starts to learn a bit about her mother's life, and what she finds in those yearbooks actually ends up linking back to the 1995 cases in some way. So it's all rather complicated. Trust me, it was very complicated to write.
Are all of the missing cases connected in a sense?
They're not all connected, but there's a loose connection between a couple of them and a stronger connection between another. But they're not really all connected. Like there's 2 missing women in 1978. Those cases are connected to one another. And then there's the 3 women in 1995, which may or may not be connected. Callie's trying to determine that.
Is this like an alien book?
Some days it might have felt like that, for sure. But it's definitely got a more complex plot than anything I've written before. It just seems like every book I get a little more complicated. I don't know why that is, but you definitely, need to be on your toes to read it. And I definitely had to be on my toes to write it. So one of the reasons it took like the last book came out in 2019. And generally I would do a book every year to 18 months. This one took longer. And one of the reasons was on top of COVID, which kind of, just messed with your head a little bit. I ended up falling on the ice and getting a concussion, and there's no way that I could keep that kind of a plot in my mind with a concussion. So I had to kind of put the book on hold until the concussion symptoms kind of drifted away.
Well, I was going to ask how you keep track of, a very complex plot. I didn't know if you have some tools or just some systems, or is there a way that you do that?
So I have the old-fashioned paper and pen notebooks. I like the ones that are spiral bound because you can rip the pages out. So as I'm writing, I'll scribble notes in the spiral notebook with little reminders to myself, like, okay, page 72, plot point needs to be resolved. Page 80, verify fact, this and this, right? So I make little notes, like even as far as the dates of the missing people. I found a calendar from, say, 1995 and looked at dates that made sense, and then decided I wanted them each to be 2 weeks apart. So I went and I checked the calendar for that date, and then maybe if there's a full moon on that date, I check all kinds of stuff like that, and I scribble all that stuff down in my notebook. But really, if you weren't me, then the notebook would make no sense to you at all. It was just random scribblings, and then when I sort of achieved what I wanted to do, I put a big check mark next to it, so that I feel like I've made progress that day if I get a check mark. And then once that page is fully checked, I just throw it out. Like, I don't keep it. Yeah, so all those notes are basically in my head. It's not the most effective. I mean, it's not the best way of doing things. It'd probably be better if I kept better notes, but I don't.
Oh God, yeah. You don't want to keep it in your head. There's so little to hold on.
I know. I don't know. That's the way I've always worked. They're all just in my head. These people living there.
Well, yeah. So that's the alien speaking to you about this. This is all a plan, right? Well, but this is kind of where does this missing person intrigue sort of thing come from for you? I mean, because that's an interesting thing. Like you're in a way you're centered on it. So like the mystery of it, like it's centered around missing people or why people went missing.
Yeah. It was started with basically with A Fool's Journey, which was the previous book 3. So I was reading my local paper at the time where I was living, and there was an article in the paper about a family that were still looking for their son who had gone missing in 2020. And this would have been, like 2015, 16, 17, something like that when I was reading it. And he left home to find himself. He left a note saying he was gone to find himself, and they had no idea where he was. And so they had this article like 15 years later, we're looking for our son, any kind of information, we just want to know where he is, and that he doesn't have to come home or anything like that. Right. And so there was a picture of him, like from 15 years ago, and it was credited to missingadults.ca. So I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So I went to that website and browsed around, and I was absolutely shocked at how many missing and unidentified people there are just in Ontario. These are only adults, only in Ontario. Right now, I think there's 1,200 missing persons cases in Ontario alone, and I think 200 and some odd unidentified remains. So we're talking huge numbers here, right? Now, some of those people left because they don't want to be found. That's the reality, right? They just want to start over. Some of them substance abuse issues, some of them dementia, some of them death by misadventure, bodies still under a rock somewhere. You don't know. There's all these different scenarios, but I just found it fascinating. So I ended up calling the founder of Missing Adults CA, Lucia Dion, who is Lucy Daniluk in the book. And she was phenomenal. She used to work for the Doe Network, and she does all this, and she's just an amazing, amazing woman that's just relentlessly pursuing, trying to put people back with their families or, provide some sort of answers to them. And so she had recommended 2 or 3 cases when I was writing A Fool's Journey, and I kind of, morphed on that. So when it came time for this book, and I realized that, once my Abigail, the main character idea didn't work out, that I have to do something, I called her and said, I'm sort of looking for an idea. And she said, she goes, I know some cases that you can kind of look into and kind of, go from there. So she recommended a handful of cases. And I went and looked at the details, and there were cases of 3 women that had gone missing roughly at the same time. And so I sort of looked at those and then just made a bunch of stuff up because, I don't want to, what if these people are don't want to be found, and I'm sort of uncovering them, right? So I never actually tell anybody who the cases are based on. But anyway, I just found it fascinating. I just find it fascinating that there are so many missing people. And we just don't think about that, right? We just don't think about that. So anyway, that's sort of how it happened. And then she said, oh, there's these other 2 cases back in the 70s that have never been figured out. And so I thought, that's how I can get Abigail involved. So anyway, out came the yearbooks, and actually, the yearbooks were because we were selling our house, and I was cleaning up stuff, and my husband had some old university yearbooks. And so I started looking through them, and then that's when I thought, yearbook, oh, yeah, that would be good. Like, because, if you have a yearbook and you look at people, like you don't remember everybody that was in your class, and you wonder what happened to those people, right? Like some of them, you know, I mean, all these years later, where are they, right? So I don't know. I just sort of took it from there.
But do they still use yearbooks nowadays?
You know,
do they still get those?
You'd be surprised. I think they do, but they're digital now, right? They're not like, you know, they're not the paper ones that you got. And, you know, because back in the day, you would have your picture taken, the first week or second week of September or something like that, right? Because they had to do all that.
Right, yeah.
So, that was the point of in the one, whereas Abigail, she's in the grade 13 yearbook, but she drops out of grade 13 in like December because she's having a baby. So, that today you'd be, first of all, she'd still be going to school because people didn't, are more accepting of that sort of thing than they were in the 70s. But
yeah, and see, and just for the listeners that know, grade 13 is an Ontario thing.
Yeah, it's not anymore, but it sort of, I think it ended in the 90s sometime.
You've got to have like a plot, a subtext, some sort of a thing that you're trying to connect with people to think about besides, Veronica Goodman and all that.
No, I would hope that it brings awareness to sites like missingadults.ca and the Doe Network. RCMP has a site, Canada's Missing, that they take a moment to look, because a lot of times there are, the unidentified, especially. That's what Lucia's working on now. She's trying to cross-reference people that are unidentified with the missing list and see if she can find connections. I mean, she's just like a tireless worker, but, something that was sort of really cool that happened with A Fool's Journey was that there was a character in there that was based on a real case called John Doe of Regina. That was the name of the case. And it was a young man's body that was found hit by a train in Regina in, however many years ago, long time ago, 20 years, 30 years, something like that. And he was never identified. And I used that case and referenced it actually in the author's notes with the case number, so people could look up to say, they're still looking for this John Doe of Regina. And believe it or not, about a year and a half ago, a DNA actually was able to identify him and return him or his belongings, whatever was left, to the family. Now, they've never made his name known. I mean, the family's chosen to keep that anonymous, as they have every right to. But they finally have closure, for lack of a better word, after all these years, because they didn't know what happened to their son. Like, to them, their son was just missing, but he'd been dead for years.
So are you going to continue kind of doing this sort of series with cold cases and kind of go into old cold cases and get ideas for them and kind of bring them to light? Yeah,
well, I'm going to stick with the cold case thing, but not necessarily another missing person one, because now I've sort of done that twice, right? Just can't do the same. So in the first one, Callie, her Calamity is her actual full name, Calamity Barnstable. She's inherits a house from her late father with the proviso that she move into the house in Marketville and find out what happened to her mother 30 years before. And so she does that as an amateur sleuth sort of thing, right? With the idea that, okay, she does that, she gets the house. Okay. And then in book 2, she decides, she'd sort of quit her day job to do this finding her mother thing. So she decides to start her own company, Past and Present Investigation. So the second book's called Past and Present. And she is, she's hired to find a woman that went missing that was murdered in 1956. Okay. So the idea is like, well, who murdered her? She finds out things about that woman. And then we went to A Fool's Journey, now this one. So yeah, I definitely want to keep with the cold case, but not another missing person. I don't exactly know what it's going to be yet. I haven't actually gotten beyond yes, I'd like to write book 5 stage, but I know it will be some sort of a cold case. Just how cold, and that I don't know.
Where to next then? You don't know. Are you going to do something on a different type of genre or different type of writing?
I am. Actually, I'm working on a project now that is a nonfiction project. But I'm reluctant to talk about it because I'm very superstitious, and I feel like if I do tell anybody, something will happen, so I can't do it. Like I'm super superstitious when I'm working on something. So I'm hard at work. I actually have a notebook filled with scribbles and notes. and I've been working on that pretty much every day since, I guess, the beginning of September. But I was sort of outlining it throughout the summer. Although I'll admit that throughout the summer I was more golfing and not so much outlining. But I did do some outlining. And so I'm now, hot and heavy on it with my notebooks and my scribbles. And I've probably written about 25,000 words so far. So, yeah. So that's what I'm up to now. So it's a complete departure from fiction. And if anything, I would sort of put it in as sort of a self-help book, but not anything to do with mental health or physical health or anything like that. It's kind of a how-to book, I guess.
Well, how was it transitioning, back and forth from fiction to nonfiction? Did you find that an easy transition, or how did that work for you?
So this one is really using a different brain. But before I was a fiction author, I was for many years, from basically 2003 till 2018. I was a freelance journalist, and I also was the editor of a couple of magazines. So one was New England Antiques Journal, and the other was Home Builder Canada. So very different kind of magazines, but and not sure if everybody knows what an editor of a magazine does, but it's not just editing. It's like you assign the freelance content, you determine the overall topic, theme, what sort of articles are going to go in there. There's a lot involved, right? But then there's also writing some of the articles yourself. So for me, this takes me back to that time, right? So because it's a different brain, because you're working with facts. You're not working with just stuff you're making up, right? So in some ways, I find it a little bit easier because, I'm basing everything on fact. But in other ways, it's more difficult because, God forbid I get a fact wrong, right? And I'm writing a book of facts, So I'm going to be super careful with this one. I always hire an editor, a professional editor and a professional proofreader. This one I'm actually working as I finish each section. There's going to be, I think, 7 sections to this. So as I finish a section, I'm sending it to an editor that I've met through some workshops that I had done, and she's sort of looking at the language of it, making sure that the language makes sense and it's easy to understand, and because sometimes when you know something really well, and I know this topic really well, it's easy to make an assumption that everybody knows it, right? And that's not necessarily the case. So this editor is very clueless about the actual topic, but she's really good at making sure the language is smooth and all of that. Once it's done, then I will send it to another editor who is really well versed in the topic and make sure that there's nothing untoward, right? So it'll be a bit more expensive for me because I have to pay these people. They don't really want to work for free, but I think it's really important. And it's a crapshoot. Like, it may or may not even sell. Who knows? But it's something I really want to do, and I'm at the point in my life where I don't really take on any project that I don't want to do anymore. Right? I did that for years, like freelance journalism and writing for magazines. A lot of the stuff was great. I loved interviewing people and learning things. And I mean, if you ever need somebody for trivia, I'm your person. I know a little bit about everything, not a lot about a lot of things, but I know like that little silly thing. So I think, in that way, it's something. But there were, articles I wrote. Like, I remember the last one I wrote, and I said, "This is it." I got hired to write about a guy that had a porta potty company, and I had to write about porta potties and make them sound interesting. And I thought, I'm better than this. I don't know whether I am, but I just thought that's it. I don't want to do it anymore. So that flushed the career down the drain, so to speak.
Jeez, you could have been something.
I could have been something, yeah. Anyway, I mean, bless his heart, he's making a living at it, and that's great. But, it just wasn't, I don't know. It's hard to make it sound exciting,
Well, okay, let's let people find where they can find you. Like you have a website and everything, don't you? You use social media.
Oh, yes. Quite the butterfly here. So it's judypenzsheluk.com, so myname.com. And it's a really good website, actually. It's got, I've got some facts and fiction there, even a little blurb about the Regina Man and the updated, link to the updated article on finding him, finding out who he was. And I've got some recipes on there and, blog posts on writing and that kind of thing. So lots of stuff on there. And then I'm on Facebook, Judy Penz Sheluk, Twitter, Judy Penz Sheluk, Instagram, Judy Penz Sheluk. So nothing fancy. I don't try to go on crazy names because then I figure it's harder for people to find me and, you want to be found. Have not yet done TikTok. I think when last I was with you, Alan, you were trying to talk me into TikTok.
Well, yeah.
And I did make a modest effort and just decided it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things, if you're not comfortable doing it, you can't do it.
Well, and also you have to understand, like, every minute you spend on social media is a minute taken away from, your writing. Right?
Yep.
And that is really what I prefer to do. Like, honestly, if I wasn't an author, I don't think I would have any social presence at all, zero.
Well, how are you gonna find the people that you capture and kidnap for your book?
Yeah.
I mean,
But that's, as I said, if I wasn't an author, like if I was just...
Well, you're still gonna kidnap people. You're just not gonna write about it.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Yeah, that's it. I'll be digging into, really you have to be so careful what you Google these days too, because, like with the Fool's Journey, at one point they suspect that he had, that the guy that went missing had a pornographic addiction, a porn addiction. And so I Googled that. You would not believe the amount of things that came as a result of that Google. You know how sometimes you'll be looking at a T-shirt and all of a sudden you get like 50 ads for T-shirts, or you look at a pair of these. Well, the same thing with the porn thing, right? I was like, seriously, you have to be so careful what you Google.
Now we're talking about Before There Were Skeletons. This is a Marketville mystery. It's book 4 of 4. And the author is our guest, Judy Penz Sheluk. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Judy.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now. Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.